April 4th, 2025, 0847 hours. NATO headquarters, Brussels, Belgium. The secure conference room on the third floor hums with the low drone of simultaneous translation devices. 23 European defense ministers sit frozen in their leather chairs, staring at the wall-mounted screens displaying a single notification from Washington. Outside the reinforced windows, the Belgian spring morning carries on, oblivious. Inside, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg's hand trembles slightly as he sets down his reading glasses. "Gentlemen, ladies," he begins, his Norwegian accent thicker than usual. At 0200 Eastern Standard Time, the President of the United States invoked Article 13 of the North Atlantic Treaty. The room erupts, not with voices. Those will come later, but with the scraping of chairs, the shuffle of folders, the nervous tapping of pens against mahogany. French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu leans forward, his knuckles white against the table edge. Across from him, Germany's Boris Pistorius removes his glasses, cleaning lenses that don't need cleaning. The United States, Stoltenberg continues, has officially withdrawn from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, effective immediately. The word immediately hangs in the air like cordite smoke. Lieutenant General André Lanata, Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, stands abruptly, his chair rolling backward. His mind races through the implications. 70,000 American troops stationed across Europe, the nuclear umbrella, the integrated command structure, the Article 5 mutual defense pledge that has kept the peace for 76 years, all of it gone. Outside, a protest about climate policy continues in the Place du Luxembourg. Reporters check their phones for the breaking news that hasn't broken yet. In Warsaw, Polish defense officials monitor their eastern border with Russia, unaware that the shield they relied on since 1999 has just evaporated. The clock on the wall reads 0851. In 3 minutes, the first news alert will hit. In 3 hours, markets will open. In 3 days, the world will be unrecognizable. Stoltenberg reaches for the water glass that isn't there. His aide, a young Belgian officer, materializes with one, her hand steady despite the chaos. The Secretary General drinks, then activates the historical archive display. A deliberate choice. On the screen appears a black and white photograph. 12 men in dark suits standing on a stage in Washington, D.C., April 4th, 1949. Exactly 76 years ago to the day. "We must remember why we exist," Stoltenberg says quietly, but every translator catches it. Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin of Britain stands in that grainy photograph, his signature still wet on the treaty. Behind him, invisible in the image, but present in every mind that conceived NATO, looms the shadow of Stalin's Soviet Union. The Berlin blockade had ended just months before. 318 days of Soviet stranglehold, broken only by Allied airlift. 2 million tons of supplies flown into a surrounded city. The message from Moscow had been clear. We can take what we want, when we want. Pistorius taps his tablet, pulling up the speech President Truman gave that day. If there is anything inevitable in the future, Truman had declared, it is the will of the people of the world for freedom and for peace. But freedom required strength. The original 12 signatories, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, the United Kingdom, and United States, had pledged something revolutionary. An attack on one would be considered an attack on all. Article 5, the cornerstone, invoked only once in history, on September 12, 2001, when European forces deployed to Afghanistan after Americans were murdered in New York. Now, in this Brussels conference room, Lecornu speaks for the first time. The president cited our defense spending, 2% of GDP. Only 11 of us currently meet it. His voice carries the weight of prophecy ignored. For years, American presidents had warned, contribute your share or face consequences. Trump's 2025 campaign had been explicit. Europe had gambled that Article 5 was sacred. Europe had lost. Lanata pulls up a map of Europe, 1939. A continent divided, unprepared, about to burn, without collective defense. He says, we return to this. Hour 4. 1,247 hours. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. Colonel Marcus Webb stands on the tarmac, watching the first C-17 Globemaster taxi toward the runway, its engine screaming against the April wind. Inside its cargo bay, the 86th Airlift Wing's classified communications equipment, already packed, already tagged for stateside return. Webb has commanded joint operations here for 3 years. He had 18 months left on his rotation. Now he has 72 hours to evacuate. His phone erupts with messages. Says, "Sir, Supreme Allied Commander Europe is American. Officially, as of 2 hours ago, that position no longer exists. The integrated command structure, built over 7 decades, is dissolving like sugar in water. Who commands the NATO response force? Who controls the nuclear sharing agreements? Whose finger is on the trigger of the tactical B-61 bombs stored in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey?" Webb's counterpart, Brigadier General Klaus Richter of the Luftwaffe, approaches across the concrete. The German's face is ashen. "Marcus, the defense ministers are demanding answers. What happens to our joint air defense protocols? Russia has 40 aircraft over the Baltic right now. Testing. Already?" Webb checks his watch. "For hours since the announcement. They knew before we did." Hour 18. 0247 hours. Warsaw, Poland. Prime Minister Donald Tusk hasn't slept. In the Belvedere Palace, emergency sessions have run continuously since noon. Poland shares a 144-mile border with Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, another 418 miles with Belarus, Moscow's puppet state. For 25 years, Article 5 has been Poland's insurance policy against a historical nightmare that consumed them in 1939, again in 1944. Defense Minister Ladislaw Kosiniak-Kamysh spread satellite imagery across the conference table. Russian mechanized units here, and here. His finger stabs 3 locations along the Belarusian border, repositioning within the last 6 hours. The 1st Guards Tank Army is mobilizing from its garrison outside Moscow. Tusk stares at the maps. His grandfather fought in the Warsaw Uprising, survived Auschwitz, told stories of divided Europe, of Western promises that never came. "Contact Macron," he orders. "Contact Scholz. If America won't defend us, Europe must defend itself." But Europe's armies are fragmented. France has 200,000 active personnel. Germany, despite being Europe's largest economy, maintains only 181,000 troops, smaller than Turkey's, smaller than Poland's own forces. Without American logistics, intelligence satellites, aerial refueling, nuclear deterrence, the continent is a collection of medium powers facing a behemoth. Hour 36. 1,447 hours. Moscow, Kremlin. President Vladimir Putin watches the Western news feeds with satisfaction. On CNN, markets have plunged. The DAX down 18%, the FTSE 12%. On BBC, retired generals speak of catastrophic strategic failure. On France 24, crowds gather outside the American embassy in Paris. Some protesting, some pleading for reconsideration. He makes no statement. The silence itself is the message. Hour 48. 1,015 hours. The Imperial War Museum, London. Dr. Margaret Thornhill stands before the exhibit she curated 5 years ago. Europe 1936 to 1939. The Gathering Storm. School groups normally fill this hall. Today it's empty except for a BBC film crew. They're recording her emergency analysis to be broadcast within the hour. "Look at this," she says, gesturing to a map of pre-war alliances. France and Britain, separate defense policies. The Little Entente, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, isolated, suspicious of each other. Poland signs a non-aggression pact with Germany in 1934, thinking they can manage Hitler alone. The Soviet Union, kept at arm's length by Western powers who fear communism more than fascism. The camera follows her finger as it traces the consequences. September 1938. Munich. Czechoslovakia's allies abandon her. Britain and France choose appeasement over collective defense. 6 months later, Hitler takes Prague anyway. Then he turns to Poland. August 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Stalin and Hitler divide Eastern Europe between them because the West wouldn't unite against either. She pauses at a photograph. A British Spitfire pilot, 1940, barely 20 years old. He died over the Channel 3 weeks after this was taken. 60 million dead in the war that followed. 60 million. Because Europe couldn't answer a simple question. Will we defend each other or hang separately? Her producer signals. 30 seconds until live broadcast. Thornhill faces a camera. NATO answered that question in 1949. For 76 years, we've lived in the longest period of peace in European history. Not because war became impossible, because it became irrational. Attack one, you attack all. Now that certainty is gone. Hour 52. 0615 hours. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Admiral Catherine Bridger watches the sun rise over the USS Arizona Memorial. The battleship beneath these waters has rested here since December 7th, 1941, the day isolationism died for America. Her great-grandfather served on the Arizona's sister ship, the Pennsylvania. He survived the attack, then spent 4 years island hopping across the Pacific, fighting a war that might have been prevented if America had committed to collective security earlier. Bridger commands the Pacific Fleet now. Her orders, received at 0400, are clear. Redeploy assets from European theater to Indo-Pacific. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, currently in the Mediterranean, will transit Suez within the week. The Second Fleet, reactivated in 2018 specifically to counter Russian naval expansion in the Atlantic, will downsize by 40%. We're abandoning the playing field, her operations officer says, reviewing the deployment maps. Bridger doesn't disagree. She thinks of the Marshall Plan, Truman's audacious bet that rebuilding former enemies would create lasting peace. $16 billion in 1948, equivalent to $200 billion today, to reconstruct a shattered continent. Not charity. Investment. The creation of a market, a partnership, a civilization aligned against tyranny. Her grandfather's generation built that world. Fought for it on beaches in Normandy, in frozen forests of Bastogne, in the ashes of Berlin. NATO was their legacy, the institutional answer to the question, how do we make sure this never happens again? Now, 76 years of architecture, dismantled in 76 hours. Day 7, April 11th, 2025, 1830 hours. Élysée Palace, Paris. President Emmanuel Macron signs a document with a fountain pen his father gave him, the same pen used to sign France's return to NATO's integrated command in 2009. Tonight, it authorizes something different, the European Defense Union. 9 nations, France, Germany, Poland, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, and Sweden, committing to mutual defense independent of American support. It's not NATO, Macron admits to Chancellor Scholz via secure video link. The German leader looks exhausted, aged 10 years in 1 week. It cannot be NATO. We lack the capabilities, the integration, the nuclear umbrella. Scholz finishes. France has 290 nuclear warheads. Britain, outside this new union, has 225. Russia has 5,580. Through the palace windows, Macron watches protesters with American flags march down the Champs-Élysées, chanting for Washington to reconsider. Other demonstrations demand European independence, an end to reliance on foreign protection. His nation is divided. His continent is divided. History rhymes, even when you know the words. Day 15, April 19th, 2025. Tallinn, Estonia. Major Christian Kask stands watch on the Narva border crossing, 15 meters from Russia. His binoculars track Russian troops across the river. More than yesterday, fewer than tomorrow. Estonia's entire active military, 7,200 soldiers. Across that river, the 6th Combined Arms Army, 30,000 strong, now positioned within artillery range of the capital. NATO membership made Estonia untouchable. Attacking Tallinn meant attacking Washington, London, Paris simultaneously. Article 5 was Estonia's life insurance. That policy just lapsed. Kask's radio crackles. European Defense Union forces are deploying a German battalion, French air support, Polish armor. 17,000 troops total, spread across the Baltics. Better than nothing. Not enough to stop a determined Russian offensive. Everyone knows it. Moscow knows it. His grandfather fought the Soviets in 1944, watched Estonia disappear behind the Iron Curtain for 50 years. Cass grew up on stories of occupation, of disappearances, of a language nearly erased. NATO freed them, the EU prospering them. American security guaranteed them. Now, Estonia negotiates from weakness. The Finnish model, neutrality, accommodation, survival. It tastes like ashes. Day 30, May 4th, 2025. Brussels, Belgium. The NATO headquarters building stands empty. Staff cleared out. Flags lowered. The iconic Compass Rose logo covered in protective sheeting. Jens Stoltenberg returns one final time to collect personal items from his office. Photographs, books, a Norwegian flag signed by every member state. He finds a letter on his desk, unmarked, unsealed. Inside, a single page from the original North Atlantic Treaty, Article 5, printed in 12 languages. The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. Handwritten at the bottom in English. Ideas are bulletproof. Institutions are not. A friend. Stoltenberg folds the paper, places it in his jacket. Outside, the European Defense Union holds its first joint military exercise. The EU announces a €1 trillion defense spending increase over 5 years. Britain, isolated after Brexit and now after NATO's collapse, quietly approaches both unions about re-entry. Turkey pivots toward Russia. China watches, calculating what Taiwan's security guarantees are truly worth. The world didn't end on April 4th, 2025. It merely remembered what it forgot. That peace is not natural, that security is not guaranteed, that the long peace of the post-war era was built by hands that refuse to let history repeat. Those hands are gone now. The question is whether new ones will build as wisely, or whether Europe must learn once again the cost of learning too late. In Normandy, on the cliffs above Omaha Beach, 9,388 white crosses stand in perfect rows. They mark the price of a world without collective defense. In Brussels, the empty NATO building stands as a monument to what happens when that lesson is forgotten. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and the meter is familiar.